Assalamualaikum everyone. Welcome to our virtual class for Topic 3, Business Cycles, Unemployment and Inflation. As always, please use these slides together with your lecture notes and your required textbook. For your information, this virtual lecture is on business cycles and the first part of unemployment. Before learning about business cycles, it is important to know first about economic growth. So, what is economic growth? Economic growth is an increase in the production or total output of goods and services in a country from one period to another. It basically tells us the big picture of a country. Economic growth can be measured in both nominal or real terms. However, real terms are often preferred because those figures are already adjusted for inflation. Countries normally count or calculate their economic growth every quarter or every 3 months. So, how do we measure economic growth? Economic growth is usually measured as a percentage change in real GDP or percentage change in real GDP per capita. Per capita here means per head. So, why is economic growth important, or why do we need it? Well, when there's growth in the economy, it creates more profits and opportunities to businesses. This will increase their stock prices. When this happens, companies will have more capital to invest and hire more workers in the future. When more jobs are created, income levels will rise. With higher income levels, consumers will have more money to spend. More spending and consumption will drive higher economic growth to happen. Okay, besides that, with economic growth, it is also easier to redistribute wealth and advance newer technologies for the people. Also, when growth happens, people will be able to have better standards of living. And with growth also, it helps to reduce the government's borrowing or the public debt level. So I told you just now, one of the measures of economic growth is GDP per capita, right? So let's put that in perspective. When GDP per capita increases, what happens is that the average person's overall well-being has improved. Now, there are many factors as to how a country can affect its economic growth. Here I share with you 5. The first is population. When there's more population, the future labor or employment will improve. This is related to the second factor, which is human resource, or the skills and abilities of the people. Better human resources will perhaps improve and lead to better economic growth for that country. The next factor is natural resources. This is followed by physical capital or physical resources, and of course there's also technology or innovation. More technology and innovation may also improve a country's economic growth. Now, having watched or having observed economic growth, policymakers and economic analysts can discover at which stage of the business cycle the economy is in. So this brings us to the next part, which is business cycle. What is a business cycle? A business cycle is the periodic or regular fluctuations or ups and downs in economic activities that a country experiences over a period of time. These economic activities are normally measured by GDP or real output. There are 4 phases of the business cycle. Let's look at them one by one. The first is peak. Peak is where the economy reaches its maximum limit of growth. During the peak, this is where business activity reaches a temporary maximum with full employment of resources. However, price is also likely to rise during the peak phase. Secondly is recession. Recession happens when demand for goods and services starts to decline. Besides that, other economic indicators such as income, output, and wages also start to decline. However, prices may not fall. The third phase is called trough. Trough is basically the lowest level of recession. A deep trough is called a depression. And the fourth phase is called recovery. This happens when there is an increase in economic activity, example, production, employment, output, and wages, when they start to continue until the economy reaches the next peak. Here is an illustration of the 4 phases of the business cycle. Here's the peak, followed by a recession, trough, and recovery, also known as expansion. This cycle will go on and on. That is why business cycle is defined as a periodic or regular process of ups and downs in economic activities in a country. As you have already learned, business cycles are fluctuations in economic activities that an economy experiences over a period of time. Business cycles are also known as economic cycles and trade cycles. So what's next is to learn what causes this business cycle. Now, fluctuations in output and employments are often caused by what we call economic shocks. Okay, so economic shocks combined with sticky prices will cause the business cycle to happen. Sticky prices means prices are rigid in that they do not change immediately even when there are changes in supply and demand. Now you need to understand anything that causes changes in economic activities, these are basically what causes the business cycle to happen. Okay? So these shocks can be categorized under different categories, which I will share with you in a bit. Okay, the first category is under the demand side. Now, all of these shocks under the demand side will cause business cycle to happen. They include changes in monetary policy or interest rates, changes in housing prices, changes in consumer or business confidence, changes in real wages, multiplier effect, as well as exchange rate movements. The second category is called the supply side. So any changes that happens from the demand supply side will also cause the business cycle to happen. These include technological shocks, population or demographic changes, changes or fluctuations in investments, as well as changes in the rate of productivity. The third category, I just put it as others. This includes changes in political events as well as changes in natural factors. Now remember, anything that causes a change in economic activity basically causes the business cycle to happen. Okay? So what are the impacts of business cycles? Now, a volatile or a business cycle that is erratic in behavior isn't that good for the economy. Let me give you several examples. Now, when we have a rapid boom, meaning that when the economy reaches its peak too fast, too soon, inflation is likely to happen. Now, inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing, which you will learn in subsequent topics. But when inflation happens too fast and too high, normally it will involve a lot of economic costs. Now, this tends to make the progress rather unsustainable. What that means is it may lead to a bust or recession happening much faster or earlier than it should be. Now, when we have a recession, what it means is that it represents a high wastage of resources. During recession, normally what happens is unemployment tends to be high. Now, prolonged unemployment isn't good as well for the economy because this involves a loss of labor and loss of productivity. What that means is there will be a fall in GDP. So you have learned from previous topics, when there's a fall in GDP, what it means is there's a fall in economic growth. And besides that, a volatile business cycle also means a high level of uncertainty. Now, uncertainties isn't that good because this will lead to investors losing confidence, losing faith in our country. So what it means is they will tend not to invest in our economy. Now, when there's a fall in investments, this will affect long-term growth. Okay, so this is basically one of the most important negative impact of a volatile business cycle. Besides that, business cycle also has impacts on durables and non-durable goods and services. Now, if you remember the last topic, we talked about durables and non-durables. I believe it's under the GDP topic. Okay, so if you don't remember, kindly pause this video and look back at the video on topic 2. Now, durables include capital goods such as housing and equipment. Basically, these are goods which are at least 3 years or that last for a long time. And there's are also consumer durable goods such as computers and refrigerators and automobiles. Now, what happens is for these durables, which includes capital goods and consumer durables, they are most affected by the business cycle because people and firms can postpone the purchases of these items. You know what that means? When people can postpone buying these items, it means people don't have to buy it. So Obviously, when you have a lot of production in line and people don't buy your products, that really isn't a good thing for your business, right? Now, besides that, the business cycle also has some impacts on non-durables. Now, non-durables includes services and non-durable consumer goods such as food and drinks. These items, however, they are not that affected. I mean, they're still affected, of course, by the business cycle, but it's not as serious compared to durables. This is because spending on services and non-durable consumer goods cannot be postponed. So anything that cannot be postponed means people will have to buy them by hook or by crook. So when that happens, even though the business cycle is not doing too well, or in other words, even if we are having a recession or a trough, people will still need to go to school. People will still need to go to the hospital and seek health services, when people are in pain. People will still need to buy food and drinks, even though we're having recession, okay? So in other words, businesses in those aspects or in those industries aren't that much affected compared to industries such as construction or anything that people can postpone their purchases, okay? Okay, so we have just finished learning about business cycles. Now let's move on to the next topic under topic 3, which is unemployment. Now, how many of you have heard this term before? Unemployment. So what is unemployment? Now, some people think unemployment simply means people who aren't working, but that's not really accurate. The real definition of unemployment is when those who are of the working age, they are without work, but they are actively seeking work. Okay, so if you want to define unemployment, make sure you talk about these 3 things. 1, they have to be of those who are of working age. In Malaysia, the working age is between 15 to 64 years old. Second, these people are without work. And third, although they are without work, they are actively looking for work. Okay, so if they are not actively seeking for work, they are not called unemployed. Now that you know what unemployment means, what you need to know now is who is in the labor force. The labor force simply constitute those who are willing and able to work and actively seeking work in the working age population. Look at this diagram. Now here we have the total population, which consists of children, pensioners, and the working age. Okay, so we can exclude children and pensioners from the definition of labor force. Now let's look at the working age group. Now the working age group can further be divided into 2 categories, those who are actively in the labor force and those who are inactive. Who are those inactive? Inactive includes you guys, students, or those who are looking after the home, such as housewives or homemakers, those who are sick, those who have retired early, and those who are called discouraged workers. Okay, I will talk about them later. Now, these group of people, they are not in the labor force. So who are the labor force? Here, labor force includes both those who are employed as well as those who are unemployed. But what's important is that those in the labor force, number 1, they are in the working age group. So now let's go back to the definition that I shared with you earlier. What is the labor force? They are those who are willing and able to work. Okay, meaning normally they are already employed, and even if they are not employed, they are actively seeking work, and they're all in the working age population. Okay, so please know this is basically the definition of labor force. Now, people may become unemployed for various reasons. Normally, people become unemployed because they are retrenched, or sometimes we call it fired. Some people become unemployed when they leave their jobs voluntarily. Some people become unemployed because they enter or re-enter the labor force, or in the process of searching for a new job. Okay, so for whatever reasons, please know the reasons as to why people become unemployed. Besides that, remember just now I talked about discouraged workers. Who are they? Discouraged workers are basically people who have just given up, like they stopped looking for jobs. So if people gave up and they're not interested to work anymore, they have basically withdrawn themselves from the labor force, so they are not counted in the labor force, so they are also not counted in the calculation of unemployment rate, which you will learn in the next slide. So how do we measure unemployment? The most popular measure of unemployment is called the unemployment rate. Now, to calculate unemployment rate is rather simple. First of all, we need to know how many are there who are unemployed in the country. Now, as you remembered, unemployed are basically those who are without work but are actively looking for work in the country. Now, the number of unemployed, we divide it by the total labor force. Now, remember what labor force is? They include both the employed and unemployed in the country who are in the working age group. Now, the number of unemployed divided by the number of labor force times 100 will give you the unemployment rate. Now, besides the unemployment rate, another important measure that we should know is called the labor force participation rate, which looks at the percentage of the working age population in Malaysia who are employed or actively looking for gainful employment. Now, how do we calculate the labor force participation rate? We take the labor force in a country divided by the total working age population times 100. Now, why don't you try this example? Okay, and once you've got the answer, we can discuss the answer when I meet you in class. Let's look at the different types of unemployment. In other words, how do people become unemployed? The first type is called frictional unemployment. People become unemployed this way when they move in between jobs. Let me give you an example. Say, for instance, you're working as a baker, but deep down, your interest is to become a teacher. So you resigned from being a baker and tried to apply to be a teacher. Now, that point in time where you are unemployed, okay, that is called being frictionally unemployed. The reason being, it takes time for you to search for a new job. Now, this taking time happens because due to imperfect information and geographical immobility of some workers. What it means is you may be looking for a job as a teacher somewhere in the Klang Valley, but then there's no vacancies. There are only vacancies in other parts of Malaysia which you aren't aware of. That is what imperfect information means. You are not aware of all the information coming from employers. And besides that, what if there is a vacancy, but the vacancy is in Johor, but you are unable to move to Johor? In other words, you are geographically immobile. That will also cause you to become unemployed. Okay, so the thing with frictional unemployment is it's not necessarily a bad thing. Economists often regard it as normal. In fact, they also regard frictional unemployment as being somewhat desirable. This is because people know what's best for them, so when they resign from one job in order to become something that they're more suited or more interested in, it basically is a better form of resource allocation. So it's actually quite a good thing for the economy. However, the government will always try to minimize the amount of frictional unemployment. How? The government would try to give better information to job seekers. So back to our example just now, maybe by registering in some sort of portal, you'll be able to know which place are offering teaching positions. Okay, so that might shorten the amount of duration of you being frictionally unemployed. Okay, the second type of unemployment is called structural unemployment. Now, compared to frictional unemployment, structural unemployment is a bit more serious because this is more long-term in nature and it's not that voluntary compared to frictional unemployment. People become structurally unemployed when there is a mismatch. Okay, mismatch between what? Mismatch between those who are looking for jobs and vacancies. Now, the reason there's a mismatch is because there are changes in the structure of the demand for labor. And these changes include changes in technology, changes in taste, as well as when certain skills become obsolete, and also due to geographic distribution of jobs changes. Let me give you an example. Let's say you are a typist. You know, normally back then typists used typewriter. Now, if you notice, there's no longer typists using typewriters now. If you are a typist, you must be able to know how to use the computer. So if you do not have that skills, if your skill is basically obsolete, then it's very difficult for you to get a job because you do not have that skills, understand? And besides that, let's look at other examples, such as taste. Okay, if there is somehow a big change in the taste of people in general, if they prefer to eat more vegan food or vegetarian, so if your restaurant only serves meat, then you're going to have a problem in that people don't come to your restaurant, so you will need to lay off workers. So those workers that you laid off, they are actually structurally unemployed. Okay, so how does the government try to minimize the amount of structural unemployment? Well, they do so by trying to give training as well as subsidies for mobility. In that way, they try to minimize the length of time someone is structurally unemployed. Now, the third type of unemployment is called cyclical unemployment. Now, from the word cyclical, yes, as you can guess, this relates to the business cycle. So, in other words, people become unemployed if it's as a result of fluctuations in the business cycle, particularly in the recession phase, then that person is being cyclically unemployed. Okay, so why does this happen? It basically happens because there is insufficient demand for goods and services. As you know, when there's recession, there's a fall in income, fall in prices. Okay, they may not happen, but normally when you have a recession, there's a fall in income, fall in output. And when there's a fall in income, people don't normally want to buy as much as they would if they were at a better economy. So when people stop buying your products, then you may be forced to lay off your workers. So those workers that you laid off are being cyclically unemployed. Okay. There's a fourth type of unemployment called seasonal unemployment, but we will exclude it from our syllabus because in Malaysia there's only one season. Okay. Okay, so we've come to the end of our virtual lecture. As always, please do read these notes together with your lecture notes and textbook. Okay, especially to those who have no background in economics, you have to read the textbook. Okay, there's no shortcut about it. If you have any questions, you can email me or you can write comments in Google Classroom, or you can just ask me in class when I see you. Okay, so that's it. Have a nice day. Assalamualaikum.